get started. To today's program. My name is Candace Summers. I'm the Senior Director of Education here at the museum, and thank you for coming to today's Lunch and Learn featuring Decatur historian Mark Sorensen, who will be exploring Illinois and Bloomington's connection to the Wizard of Oz. Before I turn the program over to Mark, I'd like to thank our Lunch and Learn sponsor, MCK CPAs and Advisors, and our live stream sponsor, WGLT, your local public media, which is part of the NPR network. This program is being live streamed and recorded, so if you don't want it to live on the internet forever, mind your P's and Q's. Oh, a little more laughter than that, come on. Sorensen was named an Illinois Library Luminary and has received the Illinois State Historical Society's Lifetime Achievement Award. He landed in Decatur 55 years ago and serves as the official McLean County historian. So without further ado, please welcome Mark Sorensen.
Hey. Thank you, Candace. And this is a great facility, the best local history museum in the state, but you're going to need a bigger courtroom, I think, pretty soon. So I want to thank Candace and Tori for doing all the tech work, and Chris downstairs for greeting everybody at the sales counter. My name is Mark Sorensen. I am a past president of the Illinois State Historical Society. My hook for getting what we're doing today is my granddaughter. A couple of years ago, Decatur was going to do the musical, The Wizard of Oz, which is basically the original film without the cuts, so it's even a longer show. And I thought I would wow her with all of my grandpa school knowledge. So in the 1970s, when I taught history in Decatur in the high schools, they had come out with new textbooks that had the little inserts and the insets of things. And one was The Wizard of Oz, and how it wasn't really a fantasy thing. It was a documentary to show that the Eastern bankers were going to be killed off and the Western drought was terrible and it was ruining progressives and all that business. Also that obviously Frank Baum was working in Chicago in his office and also moonlighting writing stuff, and he decided that he needed a name for this place, and he looked down at his file cabinets, and the bottom file cabinet, according to legend, was O to Z, and that's how we get this. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. So you'll see my granddaughter later. I wrote an article about this in Illinois Heritage for the Illinois State Historical Society, so we'd love to have you join the Illinois State Historical Society, the best state historical society in Illinois. All right, my purpose today is to explain why Frank Baum came to Chicago, how he came to write the book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, in 1900, and how that book has since been used in American culture. So I do this every time I give a presentation on this topic, is how many people in the room have seen at some point, somewhere, somehow, the 1939 MGM musical with Judy Garland, The Wizard of Oz. This audience participation, and people at home who can't see, that's almost everybody. And then the book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, came out in 1900. How many people in this room have read all the words in The Wonderful Wizard of Oz book? And the audience says 8 out of 50. So I asked Greg Coos here, many of you know him from hanging around Bloomington. Greg, if you had to explain to someone who hadn't read the book, what is it about, would you do this? And Greg gave me a very terse answer. He said, well, it's about a little girl was transported to a surreal landscape, and a young girl kills the first person she meets, and then teams up with 3 strangers and kills again. Thank you, Greg, for that. Some of the people understand what we're talking about here. I won't spend too much time on L. Frank Baum because you can Google that. And the Google, the Wikipedia entry is fairly accurate. They still have got all his Chicago homes wrong, but I can't fix everything. So looking at the screen, Lyman was his uncle's name, and he didn't like it. So Lyman Frank Baum. He was born in New York State, upper New York State, and I won't say much about his childhood other than he was 7 out of 9 children, and only about 5 of them lived to adulthood, so that's why you had 9 children, back then. And he was sort of a sickly child. He got dropped out or kicked out of military school when his parents tried to give him that. He was homeschooled, and he was very interested in writing newspaper stories, books, doing theater. And so he created, after his father built him a private theater in upstate New York, he, Frank Baum, wrote a musical based on a recent novel called The Maid of Erin. And he took that on the road with some of his relatives, and he had the lead role as Lyman Baum, and performed all over the country up through Kansas. And based on the circulation of the play, he probably spent 2 days of his entire life in Kansas. Okay. But I was interested in everything about Illinois, and so he presented in Chicago about a week or so before he went back to New York and married his sweetheart. Now, he's between 26 and 30 years old, and so his beloved was a college girl, and we'll talk about her mother in a second. So after this play, his father dies, and there was some difficulty back in New York about what he should do, run his dad's business. He wasn't a great businessman. He did this and did that. And so after he gets married and they have a couple of kids, they decide they're going to move to the best place in the United States, okay? The future utopia of the country, Aberdeen in the South Dakota Territory, okay? Because it had 2 train tracks crossing, just like Decatur, Illinois. Okay? So in Aberdeen, he opens Baum's Bazaar, which is a total flop because he's giving away merchandise on credit, and he's sitting on the street corner telling stories to little kids, and he's not paying attention to his business, and he goes bankrupt within a year or so. And then he has a really great idea. I'll buy this old newspaper in town and compete with the other 5 existing newspapers in town. And he goes bankrupt within a year on that. So he finally gets smart and moves to Chicago, where I was born. And that's in 1891 to take a newspaper job, but once he shows up at the office, they have lied to him and are not going to pay him as much as they said he was. So he is living now in a hovel with no indoor plumbing in Chicago and no running water, with his wife and 4 little kids. I would say on the near southwest side. He quits that job and he gets a job as a traveling salesman for this fine China company. And so you can kind of picture him lugging these giant ocean trunks around with the things that you open up, and he's going into department stores and trying to sell this all over the Midwest. And so he's gone all week while his wife is working with all these kids, taking care of all that business. Meanwhile, Frank wasn't crazy about his mother. Every time his own mother came to town, he would go to the Cubs game at Westside Park. And when his mother-in-law came and lived with him, he liked her. So his mother-in-law was Madeline Joslyn Gage. She dies in 1898. We'll bring that up again. She was a famous woman's suffragist and free thinker. She worked with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony to write the history of women's suffrage. She thought the religion was bad, that the Bible was putting blame on women for everything instead of giving them credit. And so she wasn't liked by everybody. But she thought that Baum had some talent in telling stories, and so she encouraged him to write down some of these stories that he'd been telling all these kids in various places. Meanwhile, Baum, in his traveling sales, has gotten so good at selling china because he's figured out, using his theatric background and his creative abilities and the invention of plate glass windows, that we can tell Marshall Fields how to set up this display in the window and sell all kinds of stuff. And so he creates a magazine on how to decorate store windows and is very successful at that. And so he finally quits his traveling salesman job. And now, with his mother-in-law's pushing, he starts entering writing contests in newspapers, and finally writes a real book. And the book is called, in 1898, Mother Goose in Prose. So basically he took the Mother Goose rhymes, which are very short, and wrote little stories about them. Maybe some backstories, maybe some future stories. So the journal he had was called the Show Window Journal, and I want you to, based on his mother-in-law, to notice that in The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, that all the dominant and resourceful characters are women. Okay. So now he's quit his traveling salesperson job and has done this, and this is a picture from the Library of Congress, one of the 2 books that he sent to have registered at the Library of Congress. You can see that in the bottom corner. Then, and that first book, I didn't mention, he gets hooked up with a young illustrator that nobody's heard of named Maxfield Parrish. There you go. And Parrish moves on from Baum, but that was Maxfield Parrish. Well, now Baum is going to write his second book, Father Goose, his book, and it's a collection of 72 nonsense poems. But Baum needs an illustrator, and so he finds a mercurial, sometimes drunk man named Denslow in Chicago, who keeps getting fired from his newspaper jobs. And Denslow becomes the illustrator for 2 or 3 pieces that Baum does. The publisher was George M. Hill, who ran this full-page ad in the Chicago Tribune in September 1899. And so a couple things here. It said the ad was a book from 2 Chicago boys. Okay, 2 Chicago men are doing this, so let's boost this stuff. The bold boy has done no wrong, his hair has simply grown too long, so Auntie placed the bowl just so to show how far the shears should go. And now the boy is full of glee, his hair is nicely cut, as you can see. Have you seen Little Sally dance? I bring that up because those of you in the room here, I will point at the ostrich and her ostrich feathers. This is 1899, and you know what's going on in 1899? We're killing every bird in the entire world for their exotic feathers. And so little Sally is wearing ostrich plumes, which don't come from live ostriches. Okay? And I'll come back to that later. I take a look at her hat and how it's designed, and this is 1899. We're going to see something in about 3 years here. So those are the first 2 books. And in 1898, as I said, his mother-in-law dies. So Maud's mother dies in their house in Chicago. Then, later that year, her brother has briefly moved to Bloomington, Illinois, and they have a baby. So Maud's brother's wife has the baby here, and all of you have read this repeatedly on the wonderful McLean County history website. So when Maud finds out that her brother's infant daughter has just died, she comes down from Chicago to Bloomington and visits the family, and the family legend is she is so distraught that she basically is fainting, and when she gets home, her husband is very sympathetic about this because allegedly they always wanted to have a daughter, not just these 4 sons. Right? So soon after the baby died and was buried in Evergreen Memorial Cemetery right down the road, the Gage family moves up to Aberdeen, South Dakota. So for the next 100 years, nobody knows about this grave here in town. And we'll talk about that now or later. Well, let's see. So what happens is, according to family legend, Baum wants to make his wife feel better. So when he writes his next book, he makes the name of the main character Dorothy. So the baby was Dorothy Gage. In the first book, the next book he writes, the main character will be Dorothy, but she has no last name. Yep. Okay. As you know from the wonderful website that you have here, a number of years ago, a researcher from Aberdeen, South Dakota now, came to Bloomington and found the gravestone, and then one of the Munchkins paid for a new stone, and both of those stones, of course, have the wrong date. And we know about, from stories in the newspaper here in town, that a chainsaw artist from up near Chicago came here and said something like, "I'm going to carve up Dorothy and her little dog, too." So this is the book cover of Baum's 1900 book. It was copyrighted in 1899, but it came out in 1900, and it is called The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. And William Denslow demanded half. So the credits are half, the money was split in half, the copyright is in half. Okay? And Denslow did some wonderful art. So this is the front piece of that, and we'll see some more in a little bit. And Baum wanted to name the book Emerald City. But the publisher, George Hill, said that book titles with gem names in them were bad luck. Okay? So they came up with The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and it was the bestseller in 1900, and it was the bestseller in 1901, biggest selling book. And it is, in case I forget to say this later, it is the Harry Potter of the 1910s, and Baum becomes the J.K. Rowling of the country for at least 10 or 15 years. So here is an illustration that Denslow did for the book that we'll come back to, and some of you remember this part of the book or one of the movies in which the lion attacks Toto and Dorothy slaps him on the nose and says, "You ought to be ashamed of yourself." Okay? So if you haven't read the book, since I started this project, I've read it 2 or 3 times, and I checked a little bit of things this week because you got a really smart audience here. And there's only about a page and a half about Kansas, and everything is gray. Everything is gray. Auntie M is totally gray and lifeless, and all the life of her has been sucked out of her by living with her husband in Kansas. I don't know. So, just before Hill went out of business, he published more of Baum's works. Baum thought, oh great, I have a bestseller, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. I'm going to move on to do other stuff. Okay, I like Dot and Tot, which was a total disaster. Okay, and so he's there and he's thinking, I want to make a musical out of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, but that's still only one thing. And what happens is kids all over the country start writing him and saying, oh, please tell what happens next. What happens next? Let's go back, does Harry and marry Hermione or not? So Baum and a man named Tegens write a musical in 1901, and they find a production company and a director, and they basically say, what you wrote is trash, and we're going to revise everything you wrote and put new songs in and change a lot of things that happen. And they open, of course, in Chicago. And so in my article, they are in Chicago for something like 8 weeks. So all of the summer of June and July of 1902, they are doing a musical production with the new name, The Wizard of Oz. And they are in one of the biggest theaters, the only theater with an elevator to the second balcony. And if you have been to Chicago and want to see that theater, the ruins are under the Picasso downtown. That's where it was. And they have included all kinds of things, and one of the things that are interesting to me is that in the program, each of the backdrops paintings were credited to artists because unlike modern shows, you had a scrim that is the back side. So you have a farm scene that was painted, a bucolic thing, you have another scene over here, you have another scene, and they're giving credit to the artists because that was such a big aspect of the production. So this is the first production of The Wizard of Oz as you can think it, and so we're going to take some time here, I hope, to go through what took place after Baum wrote his first book. This is one of the posters, and I was thinking today, because of my neuropathy, I can no longer do this yoga pose. Okay? But here's this guy doing this yoga pose on stage for the poster, and he's going to be pretty good. So what takes place is all the stuff that Baum wrote about a children's fantasy, they're saying, that ain't gonna sell. We need to have an adult show with some titillation in it, okay? So, they get two of the best comic duos in vaudeville, Fred Stone as the Scarecrow and David Montgomery as Nick Chopper, the Tin Woodman, and they play for shows after shows after shows after show, putting on that makeup and those costumes every time. We don't have any movies from this. I don't know where the script might be, but we have like 5 or 6 stills, photographs, and I've given you a couple of them here. So the first Dorothy in history, because the Dorothy in the book appears to be a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old or something. And Anna Laughlin is, what did I say? 17 years old. And so they changed several things in the show. They changed the name of the product. They say working with live animals on stage is a disaster. So they don't have a little dog. They make her best friend Imogene the cow. And they dress this man up as a cow. Okay? And one of the things I have, as my wife would say, I have learned too much about all this stuff, but because I digress every time. But what takes place is I learned from all these books that when there weren't CDs or cast album LP recordings, the actors, if they got a lot of applause, repeated the whole song over again, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times, sometimes 4 times. And so one of the anecdotes is the Scarecrow is saying, the audience doesn't know that's a person. The audience think that's a prop. And he was explaining how he was going into complete cramps and convulsions hanging here for 20 minutes as the young girl kept singing her song over and over because she wanted applause. Okay, so in the wonderful Wizard of Oz, Dorothy by herself is sucked up in a cyclone and her house is taken to Oz and she lands on something. They said, well, that's kind of boring. So we'll have Dorothy fly up and go to Oz, but let's have a streetcar conductor fly up with her and let's have his girlfriend fly up with her too, and his girlfriend's gonna be kind of risque. Okay? Because no kids are going to come see this show. This isn't a show for adults. We're going to have adult songs. And by the way, none of the songs fit the story. Okay? They're all pieces to make the actors have something special to do. So this is Trixie. And that's her waist when women were tortured. Okay? So you've heard of the 14-inch waists? There you are. Okay? And there she is. And here are the ostrich plumes again that look very much like the hat from 3 years ago. And they were real ostrich feathers, and they were dyed to look like poppies, because all these girls will be the poppies in the poppy field where people fall asleep from the drugs. When my granddaughter did this a couple of years ago, I was amazed by the technical ability of this group of theater people to show the Monty Python Black Knight scene. In other words, the Scarecrow is ripped up by the monkeys, and they have a scene there using a black box where they dismember the Scarecrow and put him back together right in front of the audience without them knowing what's going on. So a nice optical illusion from 1902. Baum becomes very wealthy. He's very angry that they changed everything until the bags of money kept coming in. And he finally told the Chicago Tribune, well, it needs to be what the audience wants. Not me. We need to please the audience. So he has, let's see, I wrote this down here. The Baums in 1891 are living in an outhouse. By 1906, they have a Michigan Avenue house, a Michigan State resort home on the lake with a large boat, and they spend several months a year in San Diego at the Hotel del Coronado. The starting price of a room today, I checked, was $745 a night. Okay. And I found out this week, I didn't know, I learn everything every week trying to keep up with you guys, is that Baum is given credit for designing all the chandeliers in the crown room of the Hotel del Coronado, and they're still there today. And they look like little crowns. Okay. So, because all the kids writing Baum about how good the book was, I want another one, he finally wrote book 2, and he added, of course, new characters. And so these are some of the characters, and he's going to monetize his project, okay? Just like the cupcakes I shared with a few people today. Okay? And he is going to have some of us, like Greg Coos, remembers Sundays coming home and lying on the living room floor and looking at the funnies, okay, all those color comics, okay, back then, and Dick Tracy and all that business. Well, this didn't last too long, but he put his new characters in here. Queer visitors from the marvelous land of Oz, introducing the Scarecrow Tin Woodman and their comrades, a fairy tale by Frank Baum, and he has the Wogglebug and the Gumph and all kinds of other Jack Pumpkinhead and things that you've never heard of before. And depending on the audience in which I talk, I might say things like, talking about fairies and queer visitors and friends of Dorothy have a totally different meaning today than they did in 1905. So again, he has to be in front of the audience, Frank Baum. So in 1908, he takes all these bags of money. He is making more than the President of the United States. And he creates a multimedia show with him as the star. And it's called Fairy Log and Radio Plays, 1908. I can't remember if I have an article about him being in Bloomington or not. He creates this multimedia show where he gets short film clips about the story, slides, what we'd call slides today, and live people, and he stands in front of a screen, stands in front of a screen and talks and tries to entertain the audience. But he takes a live orchestra, so he is going around from town to town every day or two with a small live orchestra, giant projection equipment, a full cast of characters, and he is going broke minute by minute. I read that this film he made, which is from Selig Studios in Chicago, a very famous place, that he made the film there and then sent all the film to France, where it was hand-colored, and then shipped back, adding a little expense to that. So you can see that. And Romola Remus, I looked up, and some of you know the musical Chicago. It could be based on her life. So if you want to write down Romola Remus and Google her, she has a very interesting future after she turned 5. Okay? But here she is 5. So now we have a Dorothy in the book, we have a Dorothy on stage who's 17, now we have a Dorothy in the multimedia production who is actually 5 years old. And I like this one because there she is in the black and white from the stage thing, and here she is. So the dress is exactly the same, as you can see. Frank Baum was so much in debt, he ran away. So he moved to California, to Hollywood, okay? And he declared bankruptcy, which didn't make much money because he had put all his money in, all the assets in his wife's name. So he had only 2 or 3 things in his name when in the bankruptcy. So he is living in California, but the Selig Studios say, hey, what about us? We got all this stuff. And so the Selig Studios in Chicago made a 13-minute film of their version of The Wizard of Oz. It has different names when you try and look it up. So the next few things I'm going to tell you about, you can all see for yourself. Again, on the wonderful Google, go to YouTube or Google and type in Wizard of Oz 1910, maybe add Selig, and you can watch this film that I've watched 5 or 10 times now. It's 13 minutes, and you can see how bizarre it is. But one of the things it does is it has a scarecrow in Kansas, and the scarecrow, along with all these farm animals, gets sucked up and get blown to Oz. And so now, for the first time, we have a Kansas person, besides Dorothy, going to the land of Oz. Okay. I won't dwell on that, but Bebe Daniels became famous, and she was only 9 years old when she did this show. Meanwhile, back in California, Baum can't contain himself, and so he creates his own film studio to go broke again. Okay? So it is the Oz Film Manufacturing Company in Los Angeles, and he produces 3 films in a year or so, and they're all terrible. And you can watch all of them if you want to. I mean, that's my opinion, they're all terrible. If you love them, that's fine. Okay? And of course, they're all silent movies, and modern people have put soundtracks to them. So the Patchwork Girl of Oz, His Majesty the Scarecrow of Oz, and the Magic Cloak of Oz. You could all look those up and watch them if you want. Now, so I'm thinking, just like Euripides, just like Shakespeare, people change them as we go along, and so that's just the same here as Oz. So the book in 1900 is like that, but in 1925 you got the Keystone Cops, you got the Perils of Pauline, you got cute little girls. So this man here, Larry Seaman, who I don't know much about other than he was a well-known comedian in films, and then he died impoverished because he touched the Wizard of Oz. But he made this film I'll talk about for just a few minutes. The Dorothy in this is played by a girl who's 19 who will marry this 40-year-old man very soon. Yes. Some of you recognize this guy. You think he looks familiar, right? But you can't quite place him. Samson's going to try, but... So in this version, there are 3 farm hands who get sucked up and taken to Oz. Okay? And they become a scarecrow and a tin man, and eventually a lion, sort of. So you can watch this film as well if you want to. It's a lot longer. But when I give these talks, one of the farm hands is black. And he's an actor named Spencer Bell. But to show you what was going on in 1925, in the credits on the film screen, as you can see here, he is listed as G. Howe Black. And in the film, because it's 1925 and it's a comedy, one of the main parts of the comedy is how frightened he always is and the reactions he gets. So, Walt Disney in 1937 changed the world forever. Okay? He made the first full-length cartoon, the first full-length animated feature, the first children's show to make money. And as some of you have seen that probably, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, not the recent one, but the one from 1937. And it was the box office best-selling movie of 1938. But it put the fear of death in all of the other movie studios because we got to copy that as fast as we can. What do we own? Well, Samuel Goldwyn had bought the rights to the wonderful Wizard of Oz book from the eldest Baum son in 1934 and was holding on to it. And he had hoped that Mary Pickford, okay, who's probably 30 or 40, years old or something, would be Dorothy. But then 20th Century Fox wanted the movie, and they thought they could cast Shirley Temple, who was 9 at the time. But perhaps luckily MGM got the film, and so they thought we can torture this poor 14-year-old girl, okay, put her on drugs and make her starve herself. Okay. So as you see here, we have Judy Garland and Baum's wife, his widow, because Baum has died in 1919 after having a stroke in California. I wanted to make sure I get the right name for this. So some of you, especially if you're in a woman's book club, have read Finding Dorothy. And so there is a fictionalized book, Finding Dorothy, basically a conversation between Maud Brown and Judy Garland during the year of the filming, which has some accurate things in it, and then of course a lot of made-up dialogue. So again, my project is Illinois, so I have Buddy Epstein, who was born in Belleville, and he was given the part of the Tin Man in the casting. But Ray Bolger was in love with the original Scarecrow actor and that dancing routine, and so the studio said, all right, we'll give Ray the part of the Scarecrow and we'll make Buddy the Tin Man. He's an excellent tap dancer. You've seen him with Shirley Temple in movies. Okay. So they start giving him that. They start shooting. He is recorded. So on the actual film, his voice is still on the film in parts. And to be a Tin Man, they're going to wipe him up with grease paint and then blow aluminum powder all over him. And as you see here, he didn't make it alive into the show. So he nearly died. He passed out on set, took him to the hospital, and he was there for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and barely escaped death. But they couldn't wait, so they gave the part to Jack Haley. So as you can see here, we have the cast from the poster, and Frank Morgan, who played the wizard, also had 5 parts in the film, as some of you could tell from that. And at the very bottom are the Munchkins, but nowhere on the poster is Auntie M, actress, listed. She got the schnitzel. So, a German immigrant named Leo Singer was in the United States and we don't say midget and dwarf anymore, but he had little people shows that he toured all over the country. And when they needed a little people wrangler, they called Singer, and he brought in 120 little people, including Mickey Carroll, 4'7" and Mickey Carroll, some of you know, because he is the man who paid for the tombstone out here at the Evergreen Cemetery. So I will finish up with showing you some stills from the book, Dorothy Meets the Scarecrow, and from the 1939 movie. From the book, illustration by Denslow. From the movie with Burt Lahr as the lion in this 100-pound costume that almost killed him, is a real lion skin and fur. Okay, so what happens is we change things to our own generation. By 1975, we have the blaxploitation movement with movies like Shaft and other things. And people say, well, why can't we have a black Wizard of Oz? And so they did. And it's interesting, the original Broadway show in 1975 took place in Kansas. But when they decided to make a movie out of that, they got the oldest Dorothy in the world, in Diana Ross, and had Michael Jackson play the Scarecrow. And the movie was a box office disaster. Okay? And I was going to sing and dance. Okay. Follow the yellow brick road, follow the yellow brick road, okay? Versus 1975 Boogaloo, am I dating myself? Okay. Move on down the road, okay? See? So people had a hard time saying, well, that's what it should be, but now this is what it is, okay? Maud Brown would be proud of my granddaughter. So those of you who have been to theaters recently in the last 10 years or watched TV commercials realize that in the theater anymore, sex, gender, race, ethnicity, whether or not you're in a wheelchair, doesn't make any difference anymore. And so my granddaughter got to play the Tin Man, and she's a great tap dancer, okay? Which was more important than anything else at the time. So, as things progress, some of you have seen this, think it's good or not good. So, based on the 1995 book, we have to have a prequel. How come the Wicked Witch of the East or West was wicked? I guess we'll find out. But we add things like differences in race, different song styles, so it's very operatic instead of folksy. And we have to have pop idols in there. So I wasn't crazy about the cherry ones. I didn't get to have the mint ones. I think these are wickedly delicious here. Okay. So if you have $4, you can move on down the road and get some cupcakes. Okay? These are a couple of the scenes they cut out of the new Wicked movie. Okay. And we'll finish up now here because some of you want to leave. Not me. I have another half-hour parking. But I have done so much research on this that I have gotten into the Baum family archives. I am a card-carrying member of the International Wizard of Oz Club now. There is such a thing. I just got their new International Wizard of Oz 2026 calendar, Recipes from Oz calendar. Okay. And so in the Baum archives, I found this thing there in the beginning when Baum was writing with his pencil. He wanted to make 4 characters instead of 3. And so this is what I found out, that there was a lion, a scarecrow, a tin man, and a raccoon. And this is what they all wanted. To show you people can't stop talking about Oz, I'm not making this up. I saw this on Facebook 3 or 4 days ago. There was a time when people who needed courage, a brain, and heart were found in Oz. Today, you only find them in Washington, D.C. So, well, that's my history.
Thank you so much, Mark. We have time for a couple questions. If anyone has any questions, raise your hand. I'll come to you with the microphone. That way, folks at home who are turning in on the live stream can hear your questions.
Okay, while we're waiting for questions, I'll keep talking, and that is one thing. Baum said it wasn't a dream. It's a place. So Baum is picturing it as a place that you can go to. When they made the 1939 movie, they said it was a dream that she had. A couple other little things here with the Baum Bugle. If you want to go to Wamego, this is a really good museum there, near Manhattan, Kansas. There's an Oz Park, right, David, in Chicago. There are maps of Oz that you can follow, just like Harry Potter stuff. This is an outtake because when they filmed this the first time, he's all rusted for 2 or 3 years, and of course he's not rusted, so they have to go back and reshoot. In the book, when they fall asleep in the poppies, there's a mouse queen that drags in 5,000 mice to drag them out of the poppy field. They couldn't do that in the first show, so the 1902 musical said, let's make it snow to wake them up. And then this is in Wamego. So I don't know, I don't think we had any questions.
Any questions? Oh.
I wondered if maybe they could have been just rejecting the idea of training mice and went with the snow idea for that reason.
So it was rejecting training mice to make it use snow instead.
Yep, they didn't think they could train 5,000 mice, so they went the other way.
Some people were too squeamish to
Okay. Candace?
Yes.
I'm going to say thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you once again to our live stream sponsor, WGLT, and our sponsor of Lunch and Learn, MCK, CPAs, and Advisors. I hope you'll join us next month on Thursday, December 11th, when you will learn more about the story of Lincoln and Anne Rutledge, the young woman believed to be Lincoln's first sweetheart, with our very own Guy Fraker. So thank you all again for coming, and we hope to see you next month.